Link and the Tarnished of no renown, both being everyone's favorite silent protags, with the director for Elden Ring, Hidetaka Miyazaki, actively stating he took inspiration from the Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild when designing the open world for Elden Ring. It's an overall pretty fitting matchup due to the similarities they both share, Melina and Zelda, the Elden Ring and the Triforce. I've seen this matchup discussed on a death battle cast between Inbu and Liam, and even though it was just a discussion, it's not like an actual matchup they prepared for and all that. There were certain aspects of the discussion I had glaring issues with. Inbu even went as far as to say the Tarnished doesn't scale to Radahn when we fight multiple characters that scale higher than any feat he performed, or just overlooking the fact that there's attacks that can bypass immortality in the verse, which he didn't seem to be quite aware of. For the sake of clarity, I will only be using the Hero of Time and all of the feats and scaling surrounding that specific incarnation of the hero, with Minish Cap and Skyward Sword being events that happened before Ocarina of Time, plus this incarnation of Link is also present in Majora's Mask and shown to be a shade training the hero of Twilight and Twilight's princess. The version of the Tarnished I'll be using is the standard in-game version of the player character, where you're basically Elden Lord. Since Link bears the Triforce of Courage, having a portion or piece of the creation goddess's power empowering him, I'll be granting the Tarnished the Elden Ring since it is established that Elden Lords can wield or brandish it in combat in the first place, seeing as I think most people want to know how that'll play out, given the similar nature of both of these artifacts. I might get into the Lord of Chaos versus the Fierce Deity around the end, but the method I'll be applying to determine who would win in an all-out fight between these two is essentially comparing what they can output in terms of energy, as well as comparing their respective speed scaling and fastest stimuli they can react to that's combat applicable. Also contrasting other aspects of the fight like skill, equipment, and relevant magic that's once again combat applicable for this battle. This will be a 1v1 as well, with no healing potions for either combatant, so no summons or help for the Tarnished, even though that is something in his arsenal. If you've been around for a while, you know that the Tarnished is someone I've discussed on this channel before in the past. That was one of my very first videos, so my opinion on the scaling of the verse and the general abilities in his arsenal have changed over time, as I have dug deeper into the power scaling of the Elden Ring universe when last discussing it. That's just kind of how it goes with power scaling, but since we've discussed the Tarnished on the channel before, we need to go over the Hero of Time's display of feats. Starting in Majora's Mask, the evil demon Majora was able to conjure an alternate reality within Termina's moon, utilizing the power of the mask. Alternate realities being literally different variations or versions of the established universe, that being Termina within the context of the feat. This is impressive because the demon already warped all of Termina, an alternate and parallel universe to Hyrule, into what it is. It doesn't matter if you think he didn't create it, like what most detractors assert, because he warped all of its space-time into something else entirely, as described in the Nintendo strategy guide for Majora's Mask. Most skeptics for the alternate reality feat say it's only star level because it happens to house a star. This position is fallacious, as the people who make this claim aren't really looking at the full scope of things and put an arbitrary limit to this feat based on what is visually shown. It is explicitly stated to be a reality alternate to that of Termina, a universe parallel to Hyrule, and going by that type of logic, our universe would only be star level because during daytime, the only celestial body visible is the sun. Really think about it. The mask is then transformed into its most powerful form and defeated by the Fierce Deity, his ultimate transformation and weapon he used against the demon stacked on top of his Triforce of Courage. In the 248th issue of the Nintendo Power magazine, Ganondorf in the Ocarina of Time section is explicitly called the biggest threat Hyrule has ever seen. As mentioned earlier, Skyward Sword and Minish Cap were events in the timeline that took place prior to Ocarina of Time, so this would make him above the likes of Demise and Vati, as they were threats prior to Ganondorf in this timeline. Demise, the progenitor of all evil in the series, was able to conjure a hyperspace and was stated to control and warp it. Going by Merriam-Webster's or Oxford Language's definition for a hyperspace, this indicates that for the spatial or temporal characteristics of said hyperspace, it would have to exist in the fourth dimension or be four-dimensional. Given the context regarding Demise's statements involving eternity before and after the fight, plus Fi's statement on Demise conquering time as in having control or mastery over it, it's more than likely essentially four-dimensional rather than it existing in the fourth dimension. Conjuring and having complete control over all of its space in conjunction with all of its time would indeed be something we call Universal Plus or 4D. The hero of the sky and Hylia/Zelda come out on top against this progenitor of evil, and he pretty much concedes to the fact that reincarnations of himself later down the line will give this Link more of a challenge than he himself could ever dream of. A lot of people truly think Demise is the strongest being in the series due to essentially being the progenitor of all hate and evil in the Zeldaverse, but this is being ignorant to the fact that certain threats after the original one can be superior. Indra and Ashura from Naruto aren't the strongest characters because they happen to be the progenitors of the reincarnations that came to be after they themselves eventually passed on. Same goes for those who claim Demise is superior to Ganondorf. Due to Ganondorf being a superior threat to Demise, he would naturally scale to these universe-creating and threatening forces, as the Demon King straight up admits he's inferior to the Hero of Time in base, and was even bested in his Dark Beast form as well, with little to no assistance from Zelda, unlike most of his other incarnations. When going over the raw power of the Tarnished of no renown, it cannot be underestimated. Around the beginning to early middle portion of the game, we come across a depressed Renala in the Academy of Hyrule Historia, who's so devastated that she can't even stand to fight us in her first phase. However, in her second phase, her daughter Rani, the most powerful sorceress in the game when we enter the timeline, straight up conjured a pocket universe with her magic, alongside a phantom version of her mother in her prime, representing the power of the night itself. The player character can essentially contend with and defeat Rani's magic, as everything in here is made out of it. This isn't really contradictory either, as Rani growing up in Karian tradition is naturally implied to be trained by her mother in the art of cold sorcery during her youth. Renala, at least in her prime, being able to bend the entire Hyrule Historia Academy to her knee and become its master, as nobody could really best her in magic. This would make her superior than the likes of Selen, the most dangerous sorcerer in the history of Hyrule Historia. She also went to war with Radagon, and it's implied that they were relative to each other as well, with Radagon sharing the same body as Marika, who carries the visions, the principles, and the energies of the Elden Ring. Rani was also trained by the Snowy Crone, who is stated to be well versed in cold sorceries, meaning the Tarnished would possess Uni Plus or 4D levels of power behind his attacks, even before the inevitable clash with the Elden Beast. The Elden Beast being the original form of the Elden Ring, which I'll get into later, and the incarnation of Order itself, essentially performed a similar pocket reality feat, with multiple Erd trees off in the distance, shown to hold up the physical space of this dimension, basically on some Atlas shit from God of War. As stated on the official website for Elden Ring, the source of the Erd tree, its holy tears, and its light, is the actual Elden Ring itself and its energies. And as we've established, the Elden Beast is literally just the Elden Ring in a living physical form who the Tarnished defeated. You basically pieced up a conceptual being that scales to universe threatening or creating forces. While not a traditional lifting strength feat, as the Elden Beast is not in a stationary position performing this because he's too busy in battle with the player character, it's actually far less impressive than outright conjuring it from nothing, as certain lifting strength feats might yield a measure of kinetic force that's being exerted. Again, it falls flat to the amount of energy required to bring the space of an entire universe in conjunction with all of its time into existence. The speed scaling for both Link and the Tarnished is pretty much similar in every facet, unironically. In Elden Ring, there are enemies called the Miranda Flowers that can call down beams or deluges of light, kind of like the Nagasion from Bleach, and the player character is capable of reacting to it and dodging it, fresh in the Limgrave as some random nobody without any great runes. This is actually stated in the Miranda's Prayer description, which was ultimately cut from the game, with you going on to fight many other characters that are indicated to have attacks and combat speed faster than light speed later in the game. I want to make it clear that cut content shouldn't be considered canon. However, it can be used to see the intention behind certain areas of lore throughout development, especially if the content that was cut doesn't clash with or contradict anything that's currently in the game. In this case, Miranda's prayers should be valid to use, since we literally just get insight on what this attack actually is. Of course, if you just suck at the game, or if you don't quote-unquote get good, The Tarnished is below random GOAT level. Plus, both of the fully grown Astels in the game shoot dark lasers at you in the beginning of their fights if you end up triggering the move. When it comes to the Hero of Time, he scales to his light arrows and reactions in combat, which are light speed attacks being described as bright rays of light when fired. A lot of incarnations of the hero resort to these light arrows in the climax of their games when fighting Ganondorf, and in Ocarina of Time, Ganondorf can just pretty much react to these and deflect them back at Link, and have this back and forth like sequence, which by proxy means Link can react to his own light speed arrows. The Hero of Time and many other incarnations of the hero consistently deal with the BMOS enemy, statues that shoot lasers at any enemy they spot, with Link effortlessly reacting to and dodging said lasers. However, both the Tarnished and the Hero of Time can go beyond these levels of finite speed, reaching into tiers that allow them to pretty much solo some verses unironically. In Link's case, while progression still exists as a concept, time just stands still when entering the Lon Lon Ranch or Kakariko Village, and Link can talk and move pretty casually while in these locations. And for the Tarnished of no renown, he confronts a timeless dragon that dwells in the space or chasm of time in the original Japanese, creating the divide or gap between two timelines. The Tarnished of no renown can move pretty casually in here, taking down this Elden Lord. So if we take both of these feats and apply it to the speed formula, both Link and the Tarnished can move unbounded by time's limitations, as time is a constitute of the speed formula, yet time stands still or is at 0 and distance is still being traveled. But for those who think inaccessible speed is a flawed speed tier, there are calculations for the Hero of Wild's Flurry Rush, getting his reactions and combat speed to FTL as a low end, with massively faster than light being the generally accepted mid end. I'm not going to try and connect the Hero of Time with the Hero of the Wild speed feats, as Breath of the Wild to this day is still debated about where it fits into the grander Zelda timeline. Elden Ring, on the other hand, is a hard game to scale that doesn't really ponder the speed feats that are worthy for calculations. But there are speed feats many people overlook due to the lack of a hand-holding approach in these games. You have Ronnie's magic forming an entire universe in around 50 to 55 seconds in cinematic time, which is probably a disgusting lowball and borderline disingenuous, because this is not taking into account the game's engine and the actual clock in the day and night cycle in game that's sped up drastically when compared to real time. Simply using the diameter of the observable universe, this would still easily hit in the tens of quadrillion ranges of the speed of light, or massively faster than light plus, with the Elden Beast proceeding to do this same feat but way faster. When it comes to skill in this matchup, the Tarnished is an extremely adept fighter, as this is pretty much just verbatim stated on the official site, being capable of becoming a master of magic or any form of armed combat, even the crossbows, cannons, and shields that are in his wider arsenal. He's such a skilled fighter that he not only pushed Melania, an undefeated swordsman, to resort to her goddess transformation, but also defeated her in a 1v1 showdown, with rarely little training, only developing his skills and leveling up by turning runes that he's amassed throughout his journey into strength. Even if you did choose the hero starting class, which is probably the starting class with the most combat skill, since you hail from the warrior clan of the Badlands, in which they not only wear proof of the foes they've beaten in combat as tradition, but you're essentially fated to beat the clan leader, Hoarah, who's fought in many wars regarding Stormveil and the Erdtree during his reign as Elden Lord. The nameless warrior can also best combatants with equal skill to himself, mimic tiers of the player character that copy your every move, granting the Tarnished a form of adaptation and accelerated development, besides just leveling due to the RPG elements in Elden Ring. And he is also able to contend with Black Knife assassins, trained Numens that can sneak past all of Lanedale's defenses, that ended up killing Godwyn the Golden, which was the catalyst of pretty much everything we see currently in game. For Zelda fans, this is basic knowledge already, but Link obviously has weapon mastery, being an adept sword wielder and a proficient combatant in close quarters. This alongside being a master archer and an adept shield wielder. Not only does the Hero of Time hone his skills at the training grounds within Hyrule and Termina, But the shade of the hero also mentors the hero of Twilight, passing down and teaching techniques like the Mortal Draw, for example, that are literally life-threatening by just training. This is important to note because the hero of Twilight actually does one of these techniques to defeat Ganondorf, meaning it is safe to say this level of skill is also present within the actual incarnation of the hero of time. And just like his opposition, Link has also adapted to a dark version of himself that copies his every move when entering the Water Temple in Ocarina of Time, further solidifying his formidable skill. It is pretty much safe to say that this incarnation of Link could give most of the gods in Elden Ring a run for their money through his sheer adaptability. Boasting relative feats of power and speed, while wielding similar holy instruments at their disposal, a debate is clearly able to happen between these two reasonably. So we need to actually dive into how this fated showdown would occur and who would ultimately win. Link's main pieces of equipment should be obvious, and that is the iconic Master Sword and the Mirror Shield. The Master Sword is essentially a blade that's suffused with the power of the Light Force itself, a source of infinite power that dwells in all things. In the Link to the Past strategy guide, we also know that the blade is capable of resisting evil magic. The Mirror Shield, on the other hand, is capable of reflecting energy-based beams in elemental magic that's launched or released in a throwing motion. As for the Tarnished, I'd genuinely be here for hours trying to explain all of his equipment and the abilities they provide for him, so reiterating this again, I'll only be mentioning important and relevant pieces of equipment and describing the abilities it grants for the Tarnished. The most prevalent one in his arsenal, in my opinion, would have to be the Sacred Sword. This sword is imbued with the golden light and energies of the Elden Ring itself, and this is worthy of noting because the sword has the ability to fire off massive waves of light that can sweep through anything caught in its path as described, but the holy essence and manifestations of the Elden Ring's blessings, like grace, which is stated to be golden light on its own, has been shown to exist outside of entire timelines. So now that we've established combat skill, experience, and important equipment, the initial reaction to how this fight would begin panning out would most likely start as your typical sword clash in Final Fantasy, or a fight between two Keyblade masters from Kingdom Hearts, matching each other's strikes every time their weapons meet. However, what makes the Tarnished highly effective in this form of melee combat is that the vast amount of weaponry in his arsenal doesn't just attack or cut you like regular weapons would. As in the fight against the Dragon Lord Placidusax, he's shown to be capable of actually damaging him and eventually defeat him, showing that he can physically engage with Placidusax. And this is impressive because just one of the Dragon Lord's stones can distort time passively, let alone all the stones covering his entire body. Due to Einstein's theory of relativity, one cannot distort time without in some way or form distort space, which would make the passive temporal distortions inherently interwoven with spatial distortions. And we do know that it does distort space as well. Just look at the cutscene on how we got here. If it didn't, it honestly wouldn't really make any sense. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is that it doesn't really matter how sturdy you are or what you can cut through. Absolutely no contemporary measure is capable of damaging the Dragon Lord without entering the realm of space-time manipulation, which we know the Tarnished did to overcome this threat. What this pretty much means for the Tarnished is that unless his opposition has weapons that extend to this type of manipulation that can match this, or if they just have a flat-out resistance or immunity to this type of stuff, his attacks can pretty much cut you on any plane of existence. How durable you are, even on the most fundamental level you can possibly think of, is void. Because these attacks aren't simply just piercing armor or breaking skin. It's bypassing the malleability of space-time, which is generally accepted to be what comprises the fabric of reality. The fact that his attacks alone extend to this should put into question how broken this nameless warrior actually is from a versus battle perspective. And this would ultimately grant the Tarnished something called durability negation via space-time manipulation, a form of durability negation dubbed by the power scaling community. The hero of time would be hard-pressed to counter this. Even his Triforce of Courage and the resistances and abilities it provides for him will have no answer to this. It's actually shown in Twilight's Princess that Hylians were immediately turned into spirits when caught in Xanth's Twilight Veil, with Midna indicating that those who wield pieces of the Triforce have a resistance to this, showing that the manipulation of the soul is their limit on what their durability can withstand or resist. Seeing that this is a win con for the Tarnished, would the fight even last that long to begin with? Both combatants do have a cadre of magical spells and incantations at their disposal to start the fight off, to exploit the other's weaknesses or to gain the edge in the fight respectively, rather than the possibility of a sword clash being the definitive start. For starters, the Tarnished has a lot of elemental incantations that are utilized by projecting them in a throwing motion, like general fireballs and lightning spears. These are null and void against the Hero of Time with his standard equipment, as the mirror shield can reflect pretty much all of these type of projectiles back at the nameless warrior with little to no problem. However, the Tarnished can easily dodge these reflections though, due to fighting the Mimic tier, who can pretty much copy this same type of lightning spear in fire projecting style of magic, plus Erdtree Knight Sentinels, who wield great shields designed specifically to reflect most of the projectiles in-game back at you, amplified by the holy energies of the Elden Ring, making them more potent than when originally thrown or fired. The Tarnished does have primeval projectiles in his arsenal though, non-energy based attacks that he'll probably bring out to kick it up a notch, such as the Stars of Ruin or the Founding Rain of Stars. To counter this, Link would most likely resort to the iconic protection spell Nehru's Love that forms a protective barrier around the spellcaster. Nehru and the other creation goddesses unintentionally created the Zelda multiverse, which is described to be millions of universes on the official website when creating the main universe. Even if you want to play the skeptic and claim that each creation goddess only created 1 million universes each, this protection spell would still be capable of withstanding energy or magic based attacks on a multiversal scale. The Tarnished does have an answer for this though, if he were to use it, and that would be the casting of either Renala or Rani's Moon. Both of these are not only stated to be able to dispel all sorcery that touches it, but also reduces the magic damage negation for those it strikes. This would grant both of these moons something we call power nullification with a status reduction to your magic damage negation or the defensive capabilities of one's magic, something Link has never dealt with in the entire Legend of Zelda franchise. So this is a valid counter to Nehru's Love. If this type of sequence was to actually occur in the fight, imagine it like a special key up against a magical door that's capable of withstanding some pretty impressive things. This key isn't trying to size the door up or bust it open by outputting some type of energy. It has magical nullifying properties to bypass the lock of the door, which will ultimately cause some type of disruption or penetration. What the door is actually capable of withstanding is irrelevant due to this. Link has something called Dim's Fire, an offensive magical spell that takes the form of an omnidirectional fire blast. Link can control the output of these, ignoring game mechanics, as it's stated he's fully mastered this spell, and taking the power of just one creation goddess into consideration, as I went over earlier. Link with Dim's Fire would have the output of a multiverse, if he really wanted to blast something out of his sight. This is interesting because the Tarnished does have a resistance to this, or just a flat out immunity, due to tanking the black flames that are influenced and powered by the Rune of Death at point blank range, with it exploding in an omnidirectional blast after unbinding it from the shadow Malekith. But this fire blast isn't really trying to blow you up or blast you away with second or third degree burns. It not only induces immediate damage to the core essence of one's existence, regardless of your durability, as its conceptual manipulation, as shown with Godwin's soul, but it also rapidly diminishes one's life force. The output of a general fire blast doesn't really matter, because this type of resistance isn't merely based on physical defensive measures. It's the actual grace within the Tarnished acting as a conceptual and metaphysical shield against the fundamental properties of the Rune of Death. It's actually stated that grace is what gives life to our player character, Grace's origins being conceptual and metaphysical in nature, since it originates from the Elden Ring and is the literal blessing of the Elden Ring itself, as stated by the director, which is a concept represented as as a metaphysical abstraction composed of a variety of runes that govern concepts to form an order and enforce this order on the physical world. There's also the argument that the Elden Ring just out-haxes everything in Link's arsenal due to the conceptual and metaphysical nature of the Elden Ring. To wield or to brandish this type of artifact in combat is you essentially having lordship over the concepts governed by the runes of the Elden Ring. So death, which probably isn't on the Elden Ring in any of the endings to be honest, life, order, and potentially abundance and decay, another pair of runes governing distinct concepts that were cut from the game. You aren't just attacking your opponent physically with this object, you are directly manipulating these concepts governing their existence. This level of control from just a metaphysical abstraction alone is greater than anything in Link's arsenal and will just circumvent or override any form of durability or resistance the Hero of Time has, due to it being conceptual. For those concerned about immortality in the context of this matchup, the Tarnished is pretty much flat out immortal, regardless of death being non-existent by normal means in the Elden Ring universe. Miyazaki himself actually explains what this entails when asked about the nuances between the Hollows from Dark Souls and the Tarnished from Elden Ring, pretty much confirming that while the player character has the freedom to not follow its guidance, grace is the agency not releasing the player character, giving the Tarnished a dependent or reliant form of immortality, meaning if you don't have this specific type of immortality negation, regardless of where you scale or as long as grace exists, the nameless warrior will quite literally just respawn, even if you hypothetically cut his head clean off. Link's spirit, on the other hand, is constantly reborn, as stated in the Zelda Encyclopedia, and this rebirth takes the form of the many incarnations of the hero we get throughout the Zelda franchise. He's also dealt with immortals, sort of like the Tarnished, like Ganondorf, who's bound to bring some type of doom to Hyrule due to Demise's curse, the agency that either revives him or allows him to be reborn into a new incarnation of hate entirely. But the problem is that Link and Zelda have never really bypassed the effects of Demise's curse, and Demise's vengeance is still very much alive to this day, with future incarnations still being reborn, posing a threat to the hero and princess, while the nameless warrior has sent other Tarnished on their way respectively, those being dependent on grace as they're given life by it, like Hoarah, Sir Gideon Ofnir, and Vike. So if this fated showdown was to actually occur, it's probably not in Link's favor. There is the fact that Link's magical spells and abilities are superior in what it can output than almost every spell in his opposition's arsenal, despite the Tarnished having way more variety, a clear advantage for the Hero of Time. It's just that due to the wider arsenal of magic at his disposal, having spells that can completely nullify or disrupt Link's magic on top of his own innate abilities and resistances is still just so effective. But if you think Inaccessible Speed is a flawed speed tier, as I mentioned earlier, and if you think the Hero of Time has better speed feats by pondering more to calculations and should scale to what the Hero of the Wild is capable of performing, it would be a easy victory or victories for the hero, as while not having a way to permanently kill the Tarnished, he'll just keep blitzing him and exposing his weaknesses until the Tarnished eventually gives up via submission. Overall though, I see the Tarnished besting the Hero of Time more times than not due to having pretty much an answer for everything Link has. While both are relatively comparable in terms of skill, and both being weapon specialists and masters, the weapons of the Tarnished in regards to close quarters and melee combat, as I hammered home, can pretty much slice through Link beyond a fundamental level, quite literally bypassing the malleability of what most planes of existence in our universe is theorized to be comprised of. Plus, the Elden Ring is just a better artifact than a piece of the Triforce in terms of combat, with Link having no actual way to permanently kill the Tarnished in this matchup. Some might point out that Link with the complete Triforce should be able to warp entire realities and should be able to erase the Nameless Warrior by proxy, to say that Link would in fact have an answer to this. I would partially agree with this stance if the complete Triforce was ever shown to actually have an influence on the host's individual power while they carried its energies within them, but this is never how it goes. Zelda/Hylia and Skyward Sword basically tells us that whoever possesses the complete Triforce can shape reality and fulfill any desire, but we see how this actually operates at the end of Wind Waker, seeing that the three individual pieces that make up the complete Triforce have to manifest as a tangible object outside of Ganon's body, then makes a wish or desire upon the Triforce to shape reality. This is how it goes in A Link to the Past. The strategy guides supporting this game even describe it like this as well, and this is even how it goes in Skyward Sword. With that being said, feel free to comment your thoughts on this matchup or some suggestions for versus battle videos, or even some solo videos I should cover on how strong a certain character is for potential future videos.